Good afternoon. I'm Senator Gary Daniels from District 11. You-
This would be the mic that you use to talk about people.
Okay. Needs to be on though. I just moved. Yeah. Providing public access to the meeting by telephone with additional access possible by video and other electronic means. We are utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the committee and selected legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously in this meeting through this platform, and the public has access to contemporaneously watch and/or listen to the meeting on Zoom or YouTube and via phone by following the directions and links provided on the General Court website. We have provided public notice of the necessary information for accessing the meeting in the Senate calendar. We are providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are problems with access. If anyone has a problem, please email remote senate, that's one word, at leg.state.nh.us or call 603-271-6931. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting, it will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Finally, let's start the meeting by taking roll call attendance. When each member states his or her presence, please also state where you are and if anyone is in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. I will call the roll. Senator Gaida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Bob Guida, District 2. I'm present in the Senate chamber.
Senator Rosenwald. Senator Reagan.
Senator Reagan, present.
Senator D'Alessandro.
Senator D'Alessandro present here in the Senate chamber.
Senator Hennessy.
Aaron Hennessy from Littleton, present here in the Senate chamber.
Senator Morse.
Chuck Morse, I'm president in the Senate chambers.
And I'm Senator Gary Daniels from District 11, Chair of the committee, and I am here in the Senate chambers. At this point in time, I would invite you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Our first order of business this afternoon is a presentation on House Bill 1 and House Bill 2 by Senate Finance Committee Chair Ken Weiler and House Finance Committee members.
Representative Weiler, I don't see your name, but I see Representative Ober. And Representative Umberger, is that? Yep, I see you too, both, and Representative Edwards. Okay. I'm just missing Representative Weiler. Shall we just get started?
Yes. Why don't we recognize our Representative Ober?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure where Chairman Weiler is, but will start. Chairman Weiler and I both attended the November.
Hello, can you hear me?
There we go. Ken's talking.
I've been trying to get on for 10 minutes.
I can hear Ken. Can you guys?
Yeah, Representative Weiler?
Yes, I don't know why I'm having so much trouble with this Zoom stuff, but anyway. If you can hear me all right, I'd like to ask this.
I'll promote him to a panelist.
Okay, we'll move you in as a panelist, Representative
Thank you very
Weiler.
much.
Is it possible to get more volume in here?
All right, let me see if I can come up on video. There I am.
There you go.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Senate Finance Committee, thank you. I'm Representative Ken Weiler. Here to introduce HB1 and HB2. I'll start with HB1 as passed by the New Hampshire House. We had more challenges on this, as you can see with my challenges on getting on Zoom. But anyway, we had a revenue voted in by the House in early February, and we had that as our starting point. Then when the governor's budget came to us, there was a $17 million difference in what House Ways and Means estimate had been and what the governor had sent us.
Mr. Chairman, I can't
hear
hear
him.
this.
Yep.
Can't hear him.
Representative Weiler, if you'd please suspend. Okay. We can wait just one moment. We've got somebody that's going to come in and adjust the volume here.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, in his presentation, is he going to refer to the document that we have before us? Is this what he's going to drive off of?
Yeah, Representative Weiler, are you referring to any particular documents during your presentation?
I'll start with the House Finance Committee budget briefing on House Bills 1 and 2.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to make an introductory remark. Can you hear me all right?
We're waiting for IT to come up to adjust the volume in the chamber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
What is referencing this here?
The committee will be in recess for 5 minutes.
He's got a new facility in their area.
Yeah, over by the mall.
Yeah,
That's a big one.
yeah, he says it's. He's got a car wash with it.
I think he's got an office too.
Yeah, he took his office and moved it there. But he says he's friendly with Farrell. Are you friendly with Joe Farrell? I'm not sure we want to be-
And you didn't want to meet with him?
Well, I called the girl. Couldn't really touch base with her.
So he won't take phone calls. He doesn't. You got a text. Yeah, he's tough to get a hold of.
But
I mean, in fairness to him, he's out of his mind. He wouldn't know probably Paul on Trump.
Right.
He'd know you.
So I'm gonna try to get in touch with him.
Representative Weiler, you still there?
Yes, I am.
Yes, could you just go ahead and start your presentation and we'll adjust things as I go along?
Did you hear any of my introductory remarks?
I think I'm going to ask that you start from the beginning.
All right. Mr. Chairman, members of the Senate Finance Committee, Representative Ken Weiler, Chairman of House Finance. We have passed HB1 and HB2 last week, and I'm here to make a presentation using the House Finance Committee budget briefing document, the operating budget. We had more challenges. This is, I think, the 12th budget I've been a part of. We had more challenges than we've had in the past sometimes, starting with the fact that the revenue estimate we began with was $70 million less than what the governor's budget has presented to us. We also got HB2 late. That's not unusual. But normally, the other party always votes against the budget. We've had that experience always in the past. But this time, we had a smaller majority than normal. And I'll come back to that more when we do HB2. But we are pleased to have a budget that we think is balanced. And as usual, the Senate will have more opportunities to add more money to it, as you will see revenue that we did not see. We did see some revenue after we'd completed our process, but too late for us to include it. So the highlights are: committee amendment is a balanced budget that does not rely on new taxes or federal stimulus funds from the American Rescue Plan. And the committee amendments provide $13.46 billion in total funds. This includes $5.42 billion in general and education trust funds, which is 1.4% below the previous biennium. If you may recall from the budget in the previous biennium, we were cautioned that there was $100 million of probably one-time funding. That
Representative Weiler, we did lose your video.
All right, let me try it again.
There you go.
That would not recur, and we were cautioned to put it into one-time projects, but one-time projects were all taken out, and instead the money was used to grow government. There was an 18% increase from 20 to 21 in health and human services. However, when we began to examine that budget, we did find that even though they had allowed for an increase of almost 1,000 employees, they had not been able to fulfill that. So even though they had like 3,600 employees in HHS, they were only really at a little over 2,300. So we limited that to 3,000 because of the pandemic and the hiring freeze. They were not able to grow as much as it had been forecast in the present budget. However, as we interviewed them, we didn't see that much need for growth. So there was a lot of savings there. But that was one of the places we were able to find money to match the revenue. So the committee amendment includes various tax reductions, decreases the statewide education property tax by $100 million, reduces the meals and rooms tax 8.5% from 9%, reduces the business enterprise tax rates to 0.55%, and increases the filing threshold from 100,000 to 250,000, reduces the business profits tax rate to 7.6%, and fully phases out the interest and dividends tax over 5 years. We're pleased to have all these tax cuts and still balance the budget. Committee amendment increases the rainy day fund to $142.6 million at the end of the biennium, which would be the highest total in the state's history. Then looking at the pie charts, that you have probably are familiar with. The operating budget at general funds, 3,463.1 million, showing that the biggest category for spending is health and social services. Next is education at 10%. Category 1 is bigger at 15.6%. Category 2, administrative justice and public protection, 19.6%. Category 3, resource protection and development, 2.2%, and transportation has very little money coming from general fund, but this figure, I believe, is a little off. I think it's more than the 3 million shown. We'll come back to that later. Next slide, page 3, shows the overall budget of 13,665.7 million, and showing again the biggest spending, health and social services. And then education is 22%, general government 7.7%, administration of justice and public protection 11.8%, resource protection and development is 5.4%, transportation 9.9%. That's for the spending in the overall budget. Now, as the operating budget by source at the 13 billion comes in, federal funds now come in 31.5%. Because of the CARES Act and the FMAP, the federal Medicaid assistance percentage came up a little bit because of the pandemic. So that's 31.5. Traditionally, it's been about 30%. Other funds, 20.1%, education trust fund, 15.5%, general fund at 25.3%. That's the detail that we previously covered. Liquor fund, 1.1%, highway fund is 3.6%, fish and game funds at 0.2%, and sweepstakes funds also at 0.2%. Turnpike at 2.5%. That's the operating budget. And the last one we'll look at on page 5 is the general funds and where they came from at the 3,397.5. Business profit tax were 27.8, business enterprise at 2.7, liquor sales 8.1, court fines and fees 0.7%, securities revenue 2.5, insurance taxes 7.7, communications tax at 2.3, beer tax 0.8%, Medicaid recoveries 0.2%, real estate transfer tax at 7%. Tobacco taxes did come up a little bit, they're 8%. Meals and rooms tax at 20%. That's sometimes higher than that. And interest and dividends tax at 8.1%. Others were 4.1%. We have breakdowns by division, and the division chairs will give you the details of what they did within each division. I'll turn over now to my vice chair, Representative Lynn Ober, who will cover what Division 1 did in this budget. Representative Ober.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Chairman Daniels, it's a pleasure to be here. Ken and I attended the governor's budget hearings in November, and at that time, we were aware that the governor had issued directives to all the agencies. However, I will tell you that his application of those directives was very draconian. In many of the Division 1 agencies, he'd actually laid off positions that had people in them, while leaving hundreds of vacant positions in HHS unfunded, but available to be cut off. If you're lucky, you have agencies such as lottery, liquor, fish and game, DOT, where they have enterprise funds that fund most of their funding, so you don't worry about it. Safety is also funded by the Highway Department. If you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to share my screen. I know you have the detailed change report, but I want to talk about some of the things that went on in Division 1. Hopefully you all can see that. DAS had 1.7 million of errors corrected in the budget. 1.7 million data entry errors. That led to an actual situation where 20 people had been unfunded. There was $500,000 in premature budget dollars for a law enforcement commission that hadn't been established yet. And you will hear Karen Umberger talk about that when she talks about Division 2. The maintenance budget had been double budgeted. So instead of being hit $620,000 once, they were hit for it twice. And the cybersecurity budget was not appropriately budgeted. This should be allocated into everybody's class 27 line. After we fixed these erratas, it was possible for us to restore 20 positions. DOIT, which had the cybersecurity, has a back of the budget cut because there was no way for LBA to key all the class 27 lines across the budget. DOIT had 25 staff members cut. Some of those were filled. We funded 4 of the shared positions. These are positions that when you call up and say, hey, my computer won't work, I can't get connected, I can't print, these are the positions that respond. Why anybody would cut off those positions, leaving the other agencies without support, is beyond belief. However, there are more than 20 positions still unfunded. And when DOIT comes to you, you're going to hear about agencies such as Safety and HHS, DES, who are not going to have technical support for projects they have planned or underway. You will hear Karen Umberger talk about, for example, body cameras. Well, guess where the body cameras of the data goes? Onto a server. You don't have positions to feed that, body cameras are useless. You guys are going to have to think about that. We did not have the money to restore that. DRA was fully funded as the governor presented the budget. In addition, we added 2 auditor positions, which added another $3 million in additional revenue. And you heard Chairman Weiler talk about the amount of money we were going to have to cut. What you didn't hear him say was about 10 days into the budget process, he said to me one morning, Lynn, can you cut more than you thought because Division 2 isn't going to be able to cut any money? Can you help us out because Division 3 can't cut it at all? So one of the ways we helped was to add revenue, and that's where those 2 positions come in. Treasury is obviously a favored child. They did not have any cuts. In fact, they spent more money than they had in the previous biennium. That was as a result of a couple of things. Number one, we bonded more money last biennium than normal. So the debt service has gone up terrifically. If you don't pay the debt service, then everybody's bond rates are going to go up. But the governor also had a bunch of pet projects, one of them being his scholarship money. And he had put $5 million in there. We left $1 in each of the 2 years. Why do we do that? One of the things he had cut entirely was all vocational and academic training in the Department of Corrections. So in the Department of Corrections, we used those dollars and we restored $5 million of a $6.5 million budget. You and I know the state has been sued because we didn't provide adequate training to prisoners. I also had a lengthy conversation with the commissioner, and she subsequently talked to Commissioner Edelblue about making use of VLAX, our Virtual Learning Academy school. Previously, they didn't have facilities to do that, but now that they're in the new women's prison and they've upgraded some of the facilities in the men's prison, they could actually use VLAX for people who need remedial elementary classes or remedial high school classes in order to get their high school diploma or high school equivalency. The governor had also completely cut all the staff and all the housing for transitional housing for prisoners in Concord and Manchester. Shea Farm and Calumet were to be closed. You and I know from doing budgets that it costs much less to put a prisoner in a transitional house when he or she is eligible than it costs to keep that same person in a prison cell. We fully restored that. The governor had reorganized the parole board. He went from 9 members to 5 members. We supported that. He proposed funding them at $30,000 a year. Now, Division 1, HB1 and HB2 are so intertwined, it's really not possible just to say, let's talk about HB1 now and ignore HB2. So you will see in HB2 that we cut that funding to $20,000 a year, which is up from $100 a day plus mileage. He had made the parole board chairman full-time. She clearly needs a lot of support. We made her full-time after 6 months. Why after 6 months? We needed to cut some of those pesky dollars you heard Chairman Weiler talk about. And we also had her report to the commissioner. You will see that in the budget, she has a 1-page budget report. When we asked her what personnel lines were in it, she didn't know. When we asked her what the people did, she didn't know. Commissioner Hanks did her best to help her, but hadn't really been prepared. We feel that that lady needs a lot of guidance and a lot of support, and she will get it by being attached to the commissioner a little stronger. At the very last minute, they came and said, we have to move out of our building. We're losing our lease. We added funding for that. You'll see it in HB2 and in HB1. The Justice Department was fully funded as the governor put it out, with the exception of a delay. What's the delay? Again, we needed some money. So we delayed the start of a new program, and we delayed 2 new attorney positions. The reality is, if you have all those positions funded effective July 1st, they aren't going to be able to hire them right away. They don't have the position allocation paperwork done. They can't advertise for the position until they get their paperwork done. And so starting to push those salaries out till the beginning of January saved us quite a bit of money, still gives them their staff, and gives them the time to do what they need to do. Liquor was fully funded. However, the work of Representative Peter Leishman, who took the lead, and Representative Tracy Emmerich, we have changed the enforcement division from a police division to a licensing and education division. And this includes ending the fully uniformed positions who do the police work on December 31st, but we provided full funding in the budget year to cover the cost of paying accumulated leave and other termination costs. This also gives those fully funded uniform positions a chance to move to, for example, state patrol, because they have been through police training and standards. They are fully certified officers. Business and Economics Affairs was funded with a couple of changes. I don't know if you're aware, but the governor had unfunded the Small Business Development Center. All of us on House Finance were very aware of that because we must have had about 2,000 emails about this. The first year they were funded at $50,000, and then the second year at nothing. The last year they spent money, they spent $160,000. We funded them at $225,000 for each of the 2 years, and we paid that by reducing the travel and tourism funds. Now, this didn't make the commissioner very happy. However, the governor's budget director said, we know we're going to have money in the COVID relief funds that Biden is working on for travel and tourism, so we know we're going to be okay. Department of Energy was created. We're going to talk about that a little later. There were some planning positions in OSI. All of the planning function was moved into BEA and was fully funded as part of the Energy Department reorganization. We did delay the start of 1 vacant position, again, to save some money as we needed to make those cuts that Chairman Weiler talked about. DES, while we fully funded the budget initially, when Chairman Weiler said we needed to cut more money because Division 2 was not going to be able to cut, we suspended the wastewater grants for the biennium. All the water grants are gone. That gave us $17 million worth of funding. However, we did put a section into HB2 that said that commissioner could seek additional funding every 6 months and up to 50% of the funding over revenue plan until he paid the water grants. The DES budget fully funded 89 vacant positions. We looked at unfunding those instead of doing the water grants, but so many of them are funded via federal dollars. We only would have gotten $1 million relief from unfunding the positions that were general fund dollars. We did fully fund dam maintenance for the biennium. Military affairs had new staff. We fully funded them. They have more funding from the federal government than ever before. The governor had put a section into HB2 that authorized them to do mental health services and funded them at $1.5 million. We told the general we were going to remove the funding. We were sorry, but we needed to make cuts. We were going to leave the section authorizing collaboration with the VA. We were going to leave the positions in his operational budget. And we also heard from the governor's budget director that there was funds in the COVID relief package to fulfill that. OPLC again was fully funded. I think you're going to find that they are finally on what I think of as the right track. They give a very good budget presentation this time. We supported the last piece of their reorganization, which provides better services. Much of that is in HB2. House ED&A looked at that. Some of that went through bills last year. They got lost with the COVID because they either got combined into big omnibus bills from the Senate that didn't come over, or were actually not passed in the House when we lost that whole section of bills after Speaker Shortliff had sent us home. Most of their licensing can now be done electronically, which is a big boon to all the people across the state. And the mechanical licensing board was transferred and funded to OPLC, and you'll see sections of that in HB2. Now we get to the Energy Department. The Energy Department took the Site Evaluation Committee, the Office of Strategic Management, OSI, and the PUC, put 2 people into DAS, put the planning people into Business and Economic Affairs, and combined the Site Evaluation Committee with the PUC with what was left of OSI. There are page after page after page of sections. We went through all of those. We had 3 lengthy amendments. House Science and Technology position has gone through it. I believe Chairman Daniels, you've heard from both Chairman Bose and from Representative Harrington about this. They support this in principle. They have a couple of ideas for things that need to be tweaked, and I think they will be contacting you. The reorganization actually eliminated a PUC conflict. On one hand, they were setting policy, and then as a quasi-judicial board, they were now implementing their own policy as the final board that had the judicial right to implement the policy. And that is definitely a conflict of interest. So people have long asked, how can a board that develops policy also be the ones that makes the judgment? The consumer advocate is 100% behind this reorganization. I think you'll find that with the policymaking now separated from the judicial hearings, everything will be smoother. There's one issue with the Site Evaluation Committee. 2 years ago, the Senate put a footnote into HB1 that said the Site Evaluation Committee could come to fiscal if they needed general funds, get funds from fiscal, and then spend those funds. What actually happened was the Site Evaluation Committee decided that was an open checkbook, and twice they came to fiscal and said, hey, we've just spent a lot of money. The last time it was also almost $1 million. I thought Chairman Weiler might have a little choking fit when that came up in front of judicial, but he managed quite professionally. And they said, we've spent it, you have to give us the money. We've taken that footnote out of HB1. They obviously can't be trusted with that mechanism. I don't know what a better answer is, but we didn't have time to do anything other than that. The Judicial Branch came. They are fully funded. They ask if they could have 37 district court judges instead of 35. They are apparently authorized for 45 by the legislature at a previous year, but they've been held to 35. We said yes, so that's an increase of 2 judges. They funded them. We did move the appropriation to pay the sheriffs for the transport and security of prisoners in the courthouses out of the admin service budget and into the judicial branch. And we asked them to look at whether more technology can be used. And I can tell you one of the things we have discovered with the implementation of felonies first, while it's good for the prisoners, felonies first, Tina Nedow decided that there would be no more video arraignment. So there's been a lot more transportation and a lot more security. And state law says we will pay the sheriffs up to the amount budgeted. That has been shortening all of our sheriffs in all of our counties. So state law does not say DAS will do it. It just says the state will pay. We looked at the state law extensively with LBA. It's legal for it to be in the judicial branch. We feel it should be over there. If they're going to spend the money, they should monitor the budget and decide the best way to spend it. Ken talked a little bit about rooms and meals tax. So you can just see up the rooms and meals tax was cut, business enterprise tax, business profits tax. The carry forward tax policy was revised. That is in HB2. That was a 100% House Ways and Means unanimous decision on the revision. And you're going to hear some really good news when Karen talks to you about the SWEP reduction to save property taxes for all of the people in New Hampshire. So I'm not going to steal her thunder. I'm going to let her give that happy news to everybody. Under an HB2 summary for just some of the things we haven't talked about, in DAS, there's a graphics department. A graphics fund has been established that allows them to keep the monies they earn. Payment and procurement card fund has been established. That's also a DAS project that's been very successful for years. That fund will now cover the cost of the procurement card program, moving general fund dollars out of that. Sale of the Lakes Region facility has long been around. It's been in HB2 for years. It came much more modified than what we were comfortable with. And this was bipartisan. Again, Representative Leishman and Representative Emmerich worked on that. They modified to have that stay the same. There is one issue that I really urge you to ask Senate eDNA and Senator Carson about. There's a pathway for Department of Correction employees who've been Group 2 retirement to be considered for promotion into Group 1 jobs without losing their Group 2 retirement benefits. Chairman Weiler sent all the sections that have impacted other policy committees to other policy groups. We never heard back from eDNA until after we had finalized the budget. And then we heard from a Republican member, not the chairman, who questioned this. And I will tell you, I changed that. I didn't think it was right. Some of those years are for 10 years. And some of them are, if the people have been there for 15 years, it's done based on job title. And I urge you to send that to Senator Sharon Carson and have her look at it. We added historical racing, which was HB 626, which we also voted as a separate bill on the floor of the House. So it passed there and it's coming over. HB 63 pieces were rewritten and added. This is the bill that says, if you were a business and you didn't follow the executive orders, you're going to get your fines repaid. This goes up to $10,000 in fines. It also allows for the business to ask to have their records expunged. We added House Bill 544, which is critical race theory. And I will tell you, on the floor of the House, Representative and Attorney Daryl Abbas spoke. If you don't know Representative Daryl Abbas, his father was Muslim, his mother was Egyptian. He's married to a blue-eyed Irish blonde lady who's adorable, and they have children. And he said on the floor of the House, the problem with critical race theory, from his perspective, is that his son would be taught in school that all whites are inherently racist. And that would be the son's mother was an inherent racist. While I agree we don't want racial bias, I don't think critical race theory is the way for us to go. We deleted a number of sections. You remember I said the parole board lady was chairman, Jennifer Sargent was having difficulty. She promoted her executive assistant in HB2 to an unclassified position for the parole board. She did not have a job description. She did not have a good reason for the promotion. We just deleted it without a job description to be sent off to be actually classified, whether that is now an unclassified position or not. We were not going to take somebody who was basically a secretary and move them up to a director's level. DOJ had unneeded sections. They were unneeded because they had successfully solved a court case. So they came to us and they asked us to delete them. You will hear them talk about it. We did that for them. Workers' comp had housekeeping, plus we added a section that allows them to pursue fraudulent cases of unemployment compensation. The banking commissioner will come and talk to you about a section we added that reduced the conflict that he felt he had between the ratepayers and working against the ratepayers. Labor Department had a number of housekeeping changes, including allowing the agency to use regular mail or email for notifications. There was some conversation about that because we were concerned about due process, but I believe we worked that out successfully. That was unanimously passed. In fact, all of these were unanimously passed by Division 1. And as I said before, the OPLC reorganization is complete. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation. Of course, if you have questions, I'll be happy to ask them. But if not, I'm going to hand it off to Representative Umberger for Division 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Ober. Chair recognizes Representative Umberger. Representative Ober, would you like to stop sharing your screen?
I'm trying to bring that up on my screen. However, I don't have total control over the controls, as I discovered earlier when you guys disconnected me a couple of times. So apparently part of my connectivity has been taken away. I don't know if I can get it back or not. Since I'm not a co-host, I'm struggling here as a regular participant, but your co-host could stop the sharing. There we go. She gave it back to me. I can stop the sharing. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Umberger and Representative Wiley, will you be staying around for the whole presentation, or should we ask questions regarding your section now?
I'll be staying here for the whole presentation. I want to add a little more at the end of these for the HB2.
Yeah, I'll be the whole way too, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank
Karen,
you.
you're muted.
Chair recognizes Representative Umberger.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And as I said, I do not have pretty slides like Representative Ober did, but I have some very good news. So maybe that will overcome my my lack of slides. But first of all, I believe that you have received the detailed change report for HB1. And if you would turn to transportation, you will see that we took quite a bit of money away from DOT. And a couple of the reasons that we did that was in winter maintenance, in order to balance the highway fund, we had to reduce their winter maintenance by 1.75 million. Also, with the apportionment and betterment and capital investment, those are all driven by the road toll and how much has been received with the road toll. And because road toll was down significantly, that what we had to do in HB1 was to bring those areas in line with the amount of money that was available to be spent. However, in HB2, we were able to not only restore this money, but to put in a little over $19 million from general funding. And of that, we distributed $4 million for additional highway block grants to the towns. We also added $5 million for the Highway and Bridge Betterment Program. We put in $6 million for acquisition of vehicles, fleet vehicles and equipment. And we put back $4 million for winter maintenance. And of course, this was primarily because the road toll has taken a significant hit. And we did not want the cities and towns or our state roads and bridges to suffer from the lack of road toll to be spent. For Fish and Game and police standards and training, we made no changes whatsoever. Fish and Game did ask for a hatchery manager, which we did put in there. As far as safety is concerned, if you look at the detailed change report, it looks like we did an awful lot of things in safety. But in reality, as Representative Ober had mentioned, these were a lot of simply corrections that needed to be made within their budget. And this was not a question of adding or subtracting dollars, but rather making sure that they were in the correct place. We did add 3 slots from the governor's requested positions to be added to safety. And these were in the forensic lab area. So we fortunately were able to accomplish that. In DOE, we did add robotics education to the program. The governor had cut that to 0, and we put it back as he requested in his letter at $750,000 each year for a total of $1.5 million. In the Education Trust Fund, although it is less than what we currently have in the what was budgeted in the last biennium, we did in fact increase in both areas, in both years, the amount of money that we are putting into the Education Trust Fund, which is over the current criteria for funding adequate education. So those are the primary highlights of HB1. Most of the work that we had to do in Division 2 was associated with changes that occurred in HB2. So in education, as I mentioned, we increased the amount of money that was going to the school systems, adequate education, by 17.5 million in 22. I'm sorry, 16.7 million in 22 and 17.5 million in 23. This was the recommendation from the governor based on the fact that our free and reduced lunch identified children is not accurate at this point. And that's because everyone right now that wants a free lunch can get that. And so we have no real DOE, nor I, have any real clear idea of the number of children that should be receiving the free and reduced lunch jump up in the adequate education. We also reduced SWEP by $100 million for FY23. We couldn't do that for 22 because the rates had already been set by DRA, but we put it into the 23 budget, and every town and city will be given whatever their criteria is, and that money will go back to the school systems, but the individual taxpayers will be saving $100 million from our SWEP thing, our SWEP reduction. And of course, this is again only a one-time occurrence, but we felt that it was important that our taxpayers actually saw some sort of benefit from money that is distributed to the towns and cities. We also fully funded charter schools in both 22 and 23, and we included the request for the $50,000 for lease agreements. We did not add any additional money to the lease area, but it does in fact allow the charter schools to request up to $50,000 for their leases. In addition to the funding that we provided for adequate education, we also included almost $80 million in school building aid. Now, 52 million of that is money that DOE owes on projects, on bonds, that on areas that were bonded in up to 2012. And so this money, although we don't call it a tail, it's basically money that we owe to the schools on their bonds that are going out until 2042. So there is a long line of funding that will need to be paid to the schools for the bonds that they have previously put out there. We also added 19.9 million in new school building aid. There are several projects that are out there that will qualify for this. In some cases, the towns have approved the bond, and in other cases, they have not. But we felt that at this time, it made sense for us to try to get back to at least putting some money into school building aid. And as I mentioned on the 52 million for the bonds that we owe from before, we put in $8 million to accelerate those payments, which hopefully will reduce from 2042 the length of time that we are paying on these bonds that were approved many, many years ago. We also added $5.6 million to the for special education This is for the students that are 3.5 times the normal cost of special education. And of course, this is always an area that causes significant problems for the individual school systems, especially when a child transfers in that has a huge cost associated with their special education needs. So we felt that this was a way to reduce the cost to the local taxpayers and allow these children to receive the services that they so deserved. We also provided the career and technical education community 18 million in transportation and tuition. We looked at trying to increase this dollar amount, but were informed that if we did increase this dollar amount, we would then have a new MOE with the federal government. And so any money that we put into this would then become a requirement in future years. And we felt that we did not, at this point in time, our crystal ball was not out there in relationship to whether or not in future bienniums that we could in fact afford to increase the MOE for this area. We also, I believe I mentioned already that we put money in for for robotics, and I know that is a outstanding program that the schools would have missed significantly. The Lottery Commission, as Representative Ober mentioned, historical horse racing passed the House, and this will add $18 million to the Education Trust Fund over the biennium, which of course helped us in being able to fund some of the things that we had not been able to fund without this. I also need to point out that with the governor had put $30 million into the infrastructure fund, and we took out all but $1 million in each fiscal year. And the reason that we did this is because at the current time, there is approximately $500,000 in back requirements. And we also firmly believe that most of the things that would be funded with this infrastructure fund will in fact be able to be funded with either ESRA 2 or ESRA 3 dollars. So we took that money out and used it for many of the things that I've talked about already in improving what we were able to accomplish for education. Probably one of the most controversial things that we were faced with was the merger of the university systems, university and community college systems. To say that there was no agreement on how the governor had proposed it is probably an understatement. We worked long and hard to finally obtain a bipartisan vote out of Division 2. And what we did is that we formed a commission made up of 11 members, 4 from the university system, 4 from the community college system, and 3 appointed by the governor. And we gave them specific tasks that they needed to accomplish. Also, House Education provided an excellent roadmap of what needed to be done in order for this merger to either take place or not take place. The timeline is basically the same as what the governor had proposed. This commission needs to come to the legislature in January of 22 with their recommendation and how it is going to be carried out. With the legislation, would then receive a vote up or down in both the House and the Senate. And the whatever came out of this recommendation would then be implemented in July 23, which is basically the same timeline that the governor originally recommended in HB2. But we believe that this is a good way to figure out what in fact needs to be done at both the university and the community college system levels to work together to come to grips with if it's recommended that they merge, then how that merger is going to move forward. And if the recommendation is not to merge, then how are we going to move forward with higher education in New Hampshire? To assist this commission, we put $1.5 million into HB2 for them to hire a consultant. And the 1.5 million was recommended by UNH and the CCSNH as the correct amount for in order to hire a consultant to help them along with whatever happens with this merger. Now, as a result of this process, the governor had merged the money for UNH, or the university system, and the community college system in 2023. And we took that apart, as well as added additional money to the university system to bring them level with their 2021 funding level. The community college system, we funded at 56 million, which was what the governor had recommended for 2022. So this was not an easy process. I think all of us, not only on the committee, but at the community college level and at the university system level, probably lost a little bit of sleep trying to figure out how we were going to be able to move this forward with bipartisan support. And I think that we were able to accomplish that. In safety, basically, we funded safety at the governor's level. And as I mentioned, we did add the 3 positions. But in HB2, there is a commission that was formed to to provide for a commission to review officers that maybe have crossed the line. And the governor had recommended as Lynn mentioned, the $5.6 million that to be put in there. And this is before the commission has even been formed, and how they were going to, in fact, operate this commission. So we reduced the amount allocated to the commission to $1 million in 2023, which will be about the time that they might be able to actually stand up this committee, or commission, I guess I should say. And the dashboard, the body worn and dashboard camera fund, as you know, provides $1 million to the cities and towns to help them with implementing this program. And so we obviously supported that, but did allow safety to take the cost of the person managing the program out of the money that was allocated. I think that Division 2, we did an excellent job of taking care of each one of the areas within our division. And I think that you will find, if there are additional dollars out there, that safety could use some more help in funding some of the things that the governor had recommended. I know that you have several bills about adjusting the adequate education formula to provide more dollars to individual schools. I'll let you make that decision. But I think the schools, with the extra $350 million that is coming to them in ESRA 3, plus what our division did to support education across the state, that there will be money out there for them to do most of the things that that they need to do to fund the schools. And the concern I have is, like the concern we're hearing this year, how we cheated the school systems out of $90 million. And that we are ogres because we did that. But I will remind you that 62 million of that was given to them for one-time projects. And the other 38 million was money that was put into adequate education, but only for the last biennium. And so this $90 million that we're talking about is not really money owed to them, but it was given to them for the last biennium. And the school system should not expect this additional money in the future unless the Senate says that these changes are going to continue from now until forever, until the law is changed. So if you're planning on doing that, please do not make it just for this biennium, but make it for all years in the future, because I don't think that any of us needs to continue to be hammered over money that was only 2-year money and not future money. So I thank you all, and I will be more than happy when I do have just one other thing, and this is on the 529 unique program and what goes on with their money. We did combine the higher education Trust Fund and the Governor's Scholarship Fund into the same area. And so the Tuition Savings Plan Advisory Commission will be able to transfer funds between the Governor's Scholarship Program, the scholarship program that they had been managing. And we felt that since these were all scholarships of one form or another, that they should all be in the same place. And we also eliminated the tuition payback, or the student debt payback that the governor had in the budget. We did take that out, feeling that we wanted to support our New Hampshire students with additional scholarship funding in order to help them through either a 2-year or 4-year college. So that ends my briefing. And again, I will be around to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Representative Umberger. Chair will recognize Representative Edwards.
Thank you, Chairman Daniels. And for the record, I'm Representative Jess Edwards from Auburn, Chester, Sandown, and to Senator Hennessy. This is what I look like from the front. You've spent 2 years looking at the back of my head. This is what I look like from the front. I'm here to talk about what we've done in the healthcare and social services area. I've got a graphic that I intend to use. If I can figure out which one it is. I thought I had it all ready to go. What do you know? Oh, there it is. So this is from the budget book that we used for the House last week, and I've been told by Mr. Kane that this is available to you if you want to look at something and make notes as we go. This is a document I'll be talking to. There's also the House versus Governor Division 3 detail change sheet that looks like it's a spreadsheet. If you have questions, I'll end up referring to it more than likely. But I want to start here by saying this table probably says 1,000 words that you probably need to know about and to understand, because there's math and there's political rhetoric. And I want to point out to you that the math shows that what we've done with our proposed budget, even with some back of the budget cuts, that we've not made any cuts in real life. What we've done is we've funded real growth. And so let's just do a quick walk through history. I assume you can see my slide, and I just highlighted the $723 million at the end of FY19. From there, the next budget, the one that we're just completing now, proposed raising spending a total of 17.4%. So what we've done to support real growth is we've continued to increase funding levels at a 3.7% rate. So we've bent the cost curve down, the growth rate down, so that if you just look at it on a compound annual growth basis, it drops it down to 4.9%. And many of you will recognize that in one of our political parties' platforms, there's a strong belief that we should be holding government spending down at the rate of inflation plus a little bit for population growth. And so this budget that we proposed actually supports real growth. It's a little bit more above than what the platform would have, but this was accepted. I'd point out to you that those growth rates are after a couple of back of the budget cuts that we're going to go into in more detail. So this is a realistic, balanced budget in my view, that meets promises that more than half of the legislature made to their voters. So one of the big things that we did was we put in a back of the budget reduction of 30 million in the first year and 20 million in the second year. And people may wonder, you know, what are you doing? How are you able to do that? Well, you know, I just want to keep in mind that a couple of things is that in the current year, there's about 26 million, 26.5 million in back of the budget cuts that were proposed, and we're taking it up from that a little bit. But also in this $826 million number, there is expected to be a very large lapse. Across the entire budget, I've been told that the lapse that we should expect is in the neighborhood of about 150 million. Now, that's not all DHHS. I don't know how much the DHHS portion of the lapse would be, but let's just say it's $50 to $75 million. So if we're spending no more than 800 million in the current year, allowing expenditures of up to 843 million after back of the budget cuts, I think that could be viewed pretty generously if you were a corporate manager. And so there is a back of the budget cut. What we did in our language was we made sure that it was understood that the place that these cuts come from should not be coming from direct health care. We pay for a lot of really great direct health care. And so we've said leave developmental services alone. That includes the acquired brain disorder services and the children's in-home support services. And it also includes CHIP, the health insurance program, and it protects our county programs. I've got more to say about what we've done with the county programs, but I think we've done some good things. So many people think that this is not an appropriate way to give guidance to the department. And I would counter that to say that we're providing real growth and from a financial perspective and from a personnel perspective over where they're at today. And that with these priorities established, then the management team of DHHS has flexibility to prioritize their growth, real growth. They just need to prioritize real growth. And that's not the worst place to be if you're a manager these days. In the corporate world, the last 5 years, I worked at an international medical device manufacturer. And at the end of every year, the management cut about 10% of the personnel. And when I finally got a chance to ask, why are you doing that? Why don't you try to target this? You know, I was told, you know, that it's too difficult, too complex to go in and try to target these cuts. What we need to do is get management involved in making these cuts, and we'll just keep cutting until we start to break things. Well, that's how the real world works in the corporate environment. And for us to be able to say to our leadership at DHHS that we're going to ask you to come out of the pandemic, take a deep breath, redo your strategic plans of what you really need to be doing, and grow from there. And so we've provided some strategic guidance on protecting direct healthcare programs, while at the same time, if you look at the budget briefing books that I'm sure you're going to get, you'll be able to count probably on the order of 100 federal and state laws that they have to comply with. So they're already choking in legal guidance from the federal government and from us. And so giving them a little bit of flexibility, I think, is a healthy and respectful thing to do. The next big back of the budget item is what we did with personnel. The governor's budget recommended an increase of personnel to 3,200 and change. It happens to be 3,226 to be specific. We reduced that by that 226 to get it to be an even 3,000. And again, this is being described in the media and by other opponents as a cut. And I want to assure you it's not a cut, it's real growth. Why is it? How do you know it's real growth? Well, at the end of FY19, less than 2 years ago, they were authorized about 2,950 people. So 3,000 is more than 2,950. It's greater by 50. So there's real growth from that FY19 base. But there's more. There's more because in March, if you went and looked at vacancies, they only had about 2,650 hired. So between the 2,650 on hand and the 2,950 that they had authorized, they had 300 vacancies that they were able to fill. So they can still grow from where they're at by another 350 positions before they hit this target. A growth, real growth of 350 new hires represents 13% of the workforce. But there's more. We have elsewhere told them in the second year they need to shut down the Sununu Center. So there's almost 100 people, 90 to 100 people that are working at the Sununu Center that should not be working there come the second year of our budget. So that's almost 90 to 100 more positions for additional flexibility. So from a base of about 2,650, they can either hire or reprogram on the order of 440 people. And those reprogramming of personnel would represent over a 16.5% increase over what the department has on hand as of 11 March 2021. So when you hear people talking about these personnel cuts are just unsustainable, we're not going to be able to, we should just close our doors. I just need to remind you that there's a difference between political rhetoric and math, and both financially and from a personnel perspective, there is significant and real growth. And all we're asking the strategic team of DHHS to do is to take a pause coming out of the pandemic, take a look at where they're at, take a look at the fact that we have workforce shortages to begin with throughout the state. We've got known workforce shortages. So for those that say we shouldn't have reduced this to 3,000, I would just come back and say, look, we could have raised it to 10,000. And all that would have done was lock up general funds because you can't go out and hire people that don't exist. And so I think 3,000 is a much more realistic number. We don't want state government absorbing every new hire in the state anyways, because we have hospitals and other healthcare providers that are competing for the same talent that they need these people too. So rather than having the state competing aggressively with our private sector for these scarce personnel, this will allow them to compete for 440 more people, or 16.5% more than they have today. So I belabored these 2 points, and I can go faster from here because these 2 points are really the centerpieces of what Division 3 produced. There were some decisions that we made around IT systems. We moved about 26 million of general funds out of HB1 over to HB2. And that brought federal funds over from HB1 to HB2 as well. And so if you hear somebody say, oh, they cut federal funds by over 70 million or 75 million, well, 62 million of that is related to the fact that we took this MMIS system off HB1 and put it into HB2. One may wonder why we would do that. Well, it's because there is a replacement system coming in, and we're going to have to run legacy systems in parallel. Those parallel activities are redundant and add cost that really should be viewed as one-time monies. So we put that one-time money over into HB2 to get it out of the operating budget so that we don't have to deal in 2 years with the idea that we have an inflated baseline for our operating base. We added some money, 3.3 million over the biennium to fund 4 of 5 Alvarez and Marcel recommendations. These were management efficiencies, management efficiency study. 4 of them we could do for $3.3 million, and they had a payback over the biennium of 4 million in the first year, 6.2 in the second. If you do the math, that's over a 3x return on investment with a 2-year payback. So that's excellent financial investment. Now note that 10.2 million is projected to become lapse. Well, I think if you go back and you remember that I was talking about back of the budget financial reductions, this could help them there as well. There is an issue related to a 5th item. A 5th item was more expensive, and it would have brought back placements out of state, about 38 of them, into group homes that would be built if the Alvarez and Marcel recommendation was approved. And we didn't have time to evaluate that proposal from whether or not the workforce was there, whether or not the communities were receptive to these 4 group homes that were being proposed, if those group homes would have community support for the charitable component of group home revenues. As you may know, group homes tend to get half of their money or more from charities and not from the state. So the ones that exist today have all been organic, and they have local support, and so they have local charity streams. These 4 would be dropped down, parachuted into communities, and it was uncertain to us that there would be the charitable support there. And what we were concerned is if we go ahead and build these 4 group homes and say the state will fund them, if their charity support wasn't adequate, we'd end up having to fully fund them. And then in 2 to 4 years, other group homes would be coming back to us saying, this isn't fair. We need group home equity. You need to be reimbursing us. So this was a really big issue. It didn't seem like a lot to some people that we were just going to spend $6.2 million, but the longer term implications, it's a lot more than 6.2 million. Next thing down, this has been in the news quite a bit. This was one area where we had unanimous support for closing the Sununu Youth Center. And this is against the department's recommendations and advice. Not against it as much as they took an aggressively neutral position. And the director of DCYF, during testimony said that, it was really just going to take tough decisions in order to do anything to reduce the 12 to 13 million a year that we're spending on that. We're spending 12 to 13 million a year to house the census on average of 10 to 16. So it's just financially unsustainable at that level. And there were no recommendations coming from the department on how to manage a cost reduction at that census level. So what we decided to do unanimously was to go ahead and force a closure and force the planning. And in doing so, we left money available to transition the employees to be retrained and be replaced around the state. So that's the 90 to 100 personnel that I was talking about earlier, that they will become available. We're also going to have to pay something to place youth in other scenarios. And we're still going to have the problem that there are some juveniles that are so violent that we probably need to find something like a contract with Hillsborough County Jail to use their modular system to house a few of these kids. So there's a lot of planning that still needs to be done, but we put a marker in the ground that Sununu needs to be closed. We allowed a provision to go forward to use federal TANF money to help pay for employment-based childcare needs. So if somebody's got a job but the wait lists are too long for child care services, we're allowing that some TANF money can be freed up for that. That's good for our parents. It's good for our economy. So that seemed pretty easy to do. It funds a bunch of programs at the governor's recommended levels, and I'll highlight those as we go. But there's several of them. The managed care program and fee-for-service under Medicaid and the Children's Health Insurance Program, we fully fund. We recognized that we probably didn't have to spend as much general funds as was in the governor's budget, because there were 4 or 5 areas where the enhanced federal medical assistance program percentage had not been applied. So if you were to go flipping through your detail change, you'll see several places where the enhanced match are added in, reducing our general funds obligations. This is a big one. This was, again, a unanimous one, which is nice. The governor's budget started out with the position that $5 million of the state money would be applied to help county nursing homes with their expenses. This is something called a county cap for those of you who've been doing this longer than I have. What we decided to do was, after hearing from Rockingham and Hillsborough representatives, the Rockingham County CFO came in and he told us that if the governor's budget passed, it would result in the increase of county spending such that 7 percentage points would need to be added to the county's share of the property tax. So we funded this aggressively. Instead of letting it rise 3% a year, we did it at 2%. And this is to provide real property tax relief for our citizens. So this is kind of the hidden property tax cut that isn't going to get much media and isn't very sexy because it's sort of buried in the expense structure of nursing homes and who pays for what. But it's real if you're a property taxpayer anywhere in the state, so it's good. We are allowing the nursing homes to retain excess funds at the end of the year if they're still unspent. We fully fund at the governor's recommended level all the developmental services. Those include the acquired brain disorder services. We fully fund the children's in-home services. This area can be very controversial, so I'll take a little bit to talk about it. We fully fund the governor's family planning program. And what does that mean? That means that if you go back to FY19, we spent just under $600,000 for family planning programs. And in the governor's budget, he increases that to over $800,000. So that increase is more than 10% per year on average. So we're aggressively investing in family planning services. because they do good things. They help us identify and eradicate the transmission in the population of things like STDs. It provides contraceptive advice and support for women and men. It provides pap smears and breast exams. There's good things in the family planning programming that we care to support. But what we did in HB2 at really kind of the behest of a majority of the Republican caucus was we took a look at the provision that's been in the HB2 for a few years related to Planned Parenthood and reproductive health facilities. And the language has tried to limit the funding for those other programs without much success. And so HB2 is trying an approach that has been used by other states and at the federal government level to require a firewall between abortion services and family planning services. And so to describe that firewall, it says that there needs to be a physical and a financial separation between abortion services and family planning services. Because that could cause some decisions by some of the current providers of family planning services, we put in $50,000 as incentives for new competition. So if you're a new award recipient of family planning money, you could get up to $10,000. That could help you with one-time initiation costs to get into that line, or it could just serve as a bonus to motivate organizations to compete. So there's the 812 to fund the program, and then there's 50,000 one-time money to encourage and incentivize competition. I have at least 151 signatures on a petition I need to deliver to you, Senator Daniels, to ask that the Senate protect this portion of HB2. I think it's still numbered Section 34, and over 70% of the Republican caucus has signed this petition. So this is a pretty important thing to a lot of people. And I'm sure that can be said on both sides. So the governor's budget had $9 million in there for mental health worker enhancements at the New Hampshire hospital, but this was allocated to other agency funds, and that was an error. So we had to go ahead and acknowledge the error that had been made, and this $9 million is now reflected in HB1. It's not an increase, it's just a correcting of an accounting problem. We removed Section 39 of the governor's proposal. This is for a new 60-bed forensic hospital to be co-located with the Concord Hospital. And we ended up this morning having a meeting in panel with Division 3. We brought in a representative from Public Works and from Health and Human Services committees. And that enhanced panel met for almost 2.5 to 3 hours digging into this, because we removed Section 39 because we just didn't have enough information, and we thought it needed a deep dive. And I think after the deep dive, I asked the committee if we had done the right thing by removing Section 39, and it seemed unanimous that everyone thought that it had been the right thing to do. So we're intending as a minimum to provide the Senate Finance Committee with the minutes from this morning's meeting, so that you all can at least learn from what we learned and figure out what you want to do with the governor's proposal here. The Veterans Home, we fully funded the Veterans Home at the requested level, and I'll mention Glencliff at the same time, even though that's in DHHS, we fully funded those two hands-on care programs. Of interest in Division 3 was the state of emergency clause that got added. It came through Division 3, but I think Representative Weiler may want to talk to that separately. So I know that was a little long, but hopefully it's the detail that you needed to understand. I would like to just summarize by coming back to this table. This table is it, 1,000 words. This is a growth budget. It's a realistic growth budget from a financial and from a personnel perspective. We'd like you to really consider what we've done, because we tried to keep promises that we think most of us made to get elected. So with that, if there are questions, I'll take them. Otherwise, I'll just stop.
Thank you, Representative Edwards. Representative Weiler, did you want to add anything briefly before we open it up to questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As has been pointed out, and I want to come back to it, HB2 came to us with more pages and more sections than I've ever seen before in reviewing 12 budgets. And some of them were not very popular. And as I stated before, I had a challenge in trying to pass this budget. In the past, I've always been assigned to go to the group of Republicans that don't want to vote for the budget when the Republicans are in charge of the budget. And sometimes it's as many as 60 of them that are threatening not to vote for it. And I quite often can get it down to anywhere from 10 to 20 that still vote against it, but we pass a budget. This time we only have 212 Republicans out of 400. And I can't afford to have the usual numbers that vote against it, and still pass it, because I can't count on my Democrat colleagues to vote for the budget. So I have to be able to get some promises out of my Republican caucus. So I spent a lot of time with the caucus, especially with the ones who say, oh, I've been here 4 terms, I've always voted against the budget. Those are the ones I have to target and find out, what can I do to make the budget palatable? And there were a lot of changes that I had to put in HB2. And I have to warn you that if you take them out, after the committee conference, we won't be able to pass the budget that I bring back to the House. These are, of course, you heard about the critical race theory that is anti-American, anti-white. I've been subjected to it in the military. It's a poisonous program. It's Marxist. So we put in a bill to say, we're not going to have it. The governor had threatened to veto it. I don't even think he understood it. FMLI was viewed as a partisan program, and this group didn't like it. And they said, if it's in there, we won't vote for the budget. So I probably gained 40 to 50 votes by taking FMLI out. And if you put it back in, I'll lose those votes. Also, the family planning, as Representative Edwards referred to, that's another hot button issue. I'll lose a bunch of votes there if that's changed to start to put money into Planned Parenthoods. Historical horse racing was something that we put in there, and it already passed unanimously, and not unanimously, but it passed with a good vote in the House. So we don't probably need to leave that in, but it's in there still. The caucus and hundreds of emails talk about a year-long state of emergency with no consultation with the other branches of government, especially the legislature. There's time within that year for us to have had at least a little chat with the governor. None of that has happened. That, along with House Bill 63, which is in there to take away any of these fines and so on that people have been given if they didn't go along with the state of emergency. We can witness the states that have reduced all these emergency measures, and in many cases, they're doing better than the states that have enforced even more draconian measures. So it doesn't seem right that after a year, we still have a state of emergency. The bill I put in there was during the time that Executive Department Administration Committee in the House was working on several bills. It wasn't their chosen bill. They would have preferred 433, 417 rather, but 433 was the one that was available, and 433 is what I put in there. 433 differs from 417 in that it takes place immediately. 417 is for future things, and depending on what happens in the ensuing months, perhaps it will be 433 will be more acceptable if the state of emergency has been ended. But the governor has not bothered to consult with either the House or the Senate on any of these measures, and I don't think that's appropriate, nor do hundreds of our citizenry. So be very cautious in that area if you make changes, and hopefully the governor will make changes in the ensuing months. So I wanted to point out those out, and we'll send you a memo writing out these details of why these things are not just an idea of the House, but perhaps a way that I got the bill passed in the House, and it won't pass again if they are removed. So I wanted to point that out to you, Chairman Daniels, that I will put that in writing and send you the memo. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Representative Weiler. Now open it up to questions from Senate Finance for any of the presenters. Senator Morse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have questions, well, two questions right now. One of Division 3. Do you have any detail and by the way, I think the chair will admit that we do the same thing that you just did all the time. We have documents back to 2019 that we look at the growth, and I certainly didn't sit on the last budget, so we're doing exactly what you're doing. So my question is, do you have any cuts that the House considered before they went to the 30 and the $20 million back of the budget cuts? Did you have any detailed cuts that you can offer to the Senate?
So, Senator Morse, thank you for the question. I'm just going to be brutally honest with you, sir. What happened to me was that I was new to finance and new to chairing, and so as we went through our process, I was so focused on chairing and learning finance that I did not keep a tally as we went. So why do I think 30 and 20 are good numbers? I think 30 and 20 are good numbers because there is a lot of growth and a lot of hunger in the department to do something called system of care. System of care is one area where I think there's not been adequate legislative oversight, nor is there adequate legislation guiding them. They're using as their goal the well-being of every citizen in New Hampshire, that they want to make sure that they can reach out and touch every family and help ensure that everyone's well-being is managed. And maybe that's a little extreme in my description, but I think it's effectively what they're looking at. I would say that there's an opportunity to take a serious look and slow down in the system of care area. And I think maybe coming with the amount of federal money that we're going to be getting that we don't yet know how to use, that some of that could be used to fund vital programs, or at least programs perceived to be vital by the leadership of DHHS, without resorting to using general funds. So what I would offer is that I think I'm supposed to sit with the Senate Finance team that's looking at DHHS. And as I go through things, hearing it all the second time, I'll be able to keep good notes and share those notes on where I think we could pinpoint cuts, and I would just offer those for your consideration. So I'm sorry I didn't have a better answer, that I had a secret spreadsheet already to hand you, but I just don't. I was learning while I was building the airplane.
Representative, I don't need a secret spreadsheet, and I appreciate your work. I'm just, by doing just general fund cuts, which those numbers may come out or may not come out to equal what I end up doing in my own personal calculations. There's a federal fund cut that could have been equated here also. And I think that's important to realize, whether it's 50-50 or what I'm seeing in HHS is a more enhanced number on the federal side in most categories. There may be more room there to look at it. So that's one thing. This might be for Representative Weiler, but Representative Weiler, I noticed what you did with the income from 2021, but it looks like we took out of the rainy day fund, even though we had all that income. Is that what we did? The rainy day fund in 2021.
I think that's the way the budget came to us. Our results were to increase the rainy day fund, but the budget as it came to us took money out of the rainy day fund.
No, I agree with you there. I think the governor cut 30 million, but you still ended up cutting 8 million, which, as we talk about changes and things, there'll be changes. So I just have to admit that. So
no, but
the other question I have, and you, in Division 2, I believe you talked about the one-time spending that happened in the last budget, and you know, people kind of expecting it again. The 100 million that the House is giving back to the taxpayer, isn't that similar to a one-time funding? And because they're not going to get that again, and their rates are going to go back up to next year.
That's a true statement. I won't argue with that at all. But we felt that it was essential that instead of giving the money to the schools, that we give the money to the taxpayers, even though it is one-time money.
Thank you, Representative.
Senator Morse, could I just come back to your question to me, sir? There's that Alvarez and Marcel study that we funded at 3.3 million that's supposed to return us $10 million in the biennium. That $10 million is part, I think, of what the department should be planning to use for their $50 million back of the budget. So they got to go find another 40 million, not the full 50. And given that in this last biennium, they had to find 25 to satisfy the governor, there's not that big of a gap between the 40 million that they still need to find and the 25 million they had to handle last term. So I hope that adds context, sir.
one other thing I had on my list that I forgot to mention was the FRM. We've worked together, both senators and members of the House, to try to create a system to pay back for what the illegal actions of the Banking Commission and the Attorney General had done. And we'd put as much as 10 million in budgets, and just to have them pulled out as low-hanging fruit because they were general fund dollars. This time, they are not general fund dollars. They are very specific funds that are being tapped. 4 million each year from the Attorney General's recovery fund from when he sues people under consumer protection, and the goodness of the Secretary of State to offer $1 million a year from the investor education funds that are a result of the securities division recovery from brokerage funds or either mutual fund registration funds. So those are very specific funds. I hope you will recognize that $10 million over the budget and leave it in there. So I just wanted to mention that I found a new way to put funds in there without leaving them eligible to be used anywhere else. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Hennessy.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chair, I'm not quite sure who the question's for, but it has to do with HB 626. In the fiscal note to the bill, it had a fiscal impact of $12.9 million a year, and you only included 18 million over the biennium. Is there a reason why you didn't include the full amount?
Aaron,
Just
I
to
can
get-
answer that. When we looked at that amendment, you only get 6 months of the year. Charlie gives us on the calendar year, not the fiscal year. So you're getting 6 months after you get started for the first year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Representative Weiler, I have one question. On the pie charts that you were showing us, what we know is DHHS was the Department of Health and Social Services.
Yeah, Health and Human Services. Thank you.
Okay, so we haven't changed that.
No, I don't know why that got printed that way. Thank
Okay,
you.
for Representative Ober, you mentioned on the SBDC that 160,000 was spent the second year. What was spent the first year?
Thank you for the question. That was the last year they recorded any money being spent. So far this year, they have not spent any money. We assumed, but the commissioner did not know, that they made an end of the year commitment. They had a total of 315,000 in their budget. All the emails to you will say, we got 440,000, restore it. The additional money between 315,000 and 440,000 was one-time CARES funding that they now think the state will continue to fund. You've heard this problem from Karen Umberger, so I'm not telling you anything you haven't heard. We think they will ask for money before the fiscal year ends, but they have spent zero this year, 160K a year ago.
Thank you. And it was mentioned that 67.2 million was going for special ed. Is that restricted money, or can the schools use that on any things other than special ed?
No, that's basically restricted money. Senator Daniels.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions?
Okay, thank you much.
Seeing none, well, thank you very much, folks.
Thank you for your attention. We'll talk again.
I do. Little bit late, but we'll recognize the Office of Legislative Budget Assistant presentation on the surplus statement.
Good morning. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right. Just a couple quick things based on the questions you had on the pie chart, just to verify health and social services. That's the category title because it does include health and human services, but also includes veterans homes. So I did want to just verify that. And then I'm going to go right into the surplus statement because I know we're limited on time. Do you mind if I share my screen? Would that be okay?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to go down to, on your house presentation, I'm going to go down to page 19. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
Okay. First question, I basically want to follow up on Senator Morris had a question relative to the rainy day fund. And it is true. You can see that in FY21 on the surplus statement, both the governor and the House Finance Committee, based on the revenues and the current spending trends, assumed that there would need to be a transfer from the rainy day fund to the general fund. The governor, based on his estimates back in January or early February, was a $29.9 million transfer. The House Finance Committee, when they received their revised estimates in March from the Ways and Means Committee, you do see that they reduced that transfer from the rainy day fund down to 7.8. And the reason that shows as a transfer is because there was no suspension proposed by either the governor or the House to the current rainy day fund provisions, which there are two triggers or two instances or two scenarios that need to occur for the rainy day fund to transfer. Number one is it has to be an operating budget deficit, which we right now we do assume. But the other is that the revenue for the biennium has to be below plan. And even with the additional revenues in 21 from the Ways and Means Committee, and even though they would be above the current plan by close to 70 million, it wasn't enough to offset the revenue reduction in 20 or the revenue decrease in 20 of almost $100 million. And so they still ended up in a net negative position for revenue. So with no suspension of the rainy day fund provisions, it does end up kicking in. But as the Senate, as you know, as the Senate Ways and Means Committee looks at revenue, looks at the revenue that came in through March, looks at the revenue as it begins to come in the middle of April, that will most likely change the ability or the reason need for a rainy day fund transfer. If at the end of the Ways and Means process, there is still the rainy day fund transfer, there is always an opportunity for the Senate or the legislature to suspend those provisions and carry a negative forward into 22. But just for illustrative purposes, you can see that current statute as is for the governor and House Finance. 19, so if you look at row 20 for 21, balance extra transfers, this is combined general education trust fund. That is education trust fund. So $5.5 million balance the education trust fund, which is non-lapsing in the governor's proposed budget, almost 19.9 for the House passed version of the budget in the education trust fund. Those carry forward. There are no general fund, positive general fund balances carried forward. Those two numbers on row 20 carry up onto row 1 under the FY22 column, and that's the beginning balance the education trust fund. Estimated revenues from the House Ways and Means Committee came out with revenue adjustments, came to about $2.75 billion, offset by expenditures or appropriations of about $2.7 billion, leaving a current year balance of about $47.2 million and a cumulative ending balance of $67.1 million for both funds. You can see that the row 11 lapse estimate did increase by the $4 million that Representative Edwards did mention relative to the Alvarez and Marcel contract. So that moved from 67 million to 71 million based on that Division 3 action. $67 million carries forward into the following year, 23, because as you know, in the first year of a biennium, no rainy day fund is triggered. The Education Trust Fund and General Fund, they will carry forward into the following fiscal year. So the beginning balance is $67.1 million in House Finance. The total revenues come to about $2.682 billion. However, if you look on row 5 under the 23 in that last column, you'll see a negative adjustment of almost $118 million. That includes the various tax changes, but the largest one being the SWEPT, being the reduction to the education property tax. So there is a decrease. So net revenues, 2.682. The total appropriations came out to about 2.714 for a current year balance of about negative 32.2. Depending on how this, as we move forward throughout the process, that the negative 32.2 is just a reflection of how the reduction of statewide property tax is treated as a revenue reduction. And then it's trued up in a positive transfer from the general fund to the education trust fund. Numbers can move around. If that was a straight revenue transfer from the general fund to the education trust fund, as opposed to an appropriation or transfer, those revenue numbers up top would change and your current year balance would show it would show a positive situation. In the end, The House budget proposes to deposit $34.9 million into the rainy day fund to bring it to 142.6. So there was the transfer from the rainy day fund of 7.8 and then a deposit of 34.9, roughly about $27 million of additional funds added to the current balance of 115.5 to bring the rainy day fund to $142.6 million. And I'm just going to scroll to the kind of following pages just to show you how the general fund plays out. We can see in 21, the negative on row 21, that's the 7.8 million. And obviously Senate Ways and Means revenues will impact that. And so you can see a zero balance at the end of the year. Current balance, year balance of 40.1 and 22, which is carried forward into 23. And then you do have 1.6, almost $1.7 million in general fund revenue, offset by about $1.63 million in general fund appropriations. A big transfer right here on row 19, which includes the $63.3 million transfer from the general fund as a result of the statewide property tax decrease is included here. So it's 63.3 transfer from the general fund as in addition to a shortfall of a couple $2 million in the current year based on revenues. So you can see the transfer to the Education Trust Fund that brings that balance down to 34.9, which is then put into the rainy day fund. And I'm just going to go through a couple schedules. I know you don't have, we don't have too much time, but in our schedule 2, what we tried to show is the adjustments in House Bill 1 and 2 that impact our revenue estimates, as well as the appropriations in section 1 of the budget. And so you can see in 22 for House Finance or House Pass now, total revenue adjustments of a negative 15, almost $15.1 million in 22, another 16.1 in 23. The largest reduction you will see is the Meals and Rooms tax rate of a reduction to 8.5%. It did come down from what the governor assumed, but that is because of the timing and the applicability of the Meals and Rooms tax. When DRA worked with House Ways and Means, they did revise those estimates. So between two funds, that Meals and Rooms tax rate decrease does cost revenue about $30 million. You have some BET threshold increases, small amounts on the general fund side. Most of those amounts are on the Education Trust Fund side, which I will get to. BET rate decreased to 0.55%. Again, BET, you'll see a majority of those reductions of the impact over in the Education Trust Fund side. I did want to just point out House Bill or row 7, because when you reduce the BET tax rate or increase the threshold, it does impact what businesses can use as a credit towards their business profits tax owed. So the governor there was a positive impact of almost $11 million of between the two funds from basically a BPT pickup as a result of the changes. You can see those zeroed out in the House Finance column. And the reason for that is because House Finance also included a decrease in the BPT rate to 7.6%, which was not included in the governor's. So the total cost of that was a negative 1.3 and 3.6 on the BPT side, but you also lost the positive $11 million pickup under the BPT credit portion. So the total cost of that 7.6% decrease to the BPT was closer to the $16 million range. It's just, you'll see the differences between here is where that shows up. You do have a credit carry forward. There was a provision in the House Bill 2 that's provided by the governor's office that Ways and Means looked at. And that has to do with the 270 plus, probably pushing close to $280 million of business tax credit carry forwards that are on the books that businesses can choose to either request a refund or use towards their estimated tax payments. And that's a number that continues to increase. And so the governor had a proposal to require businesses to request a refund of up to, I believe it was up to 50% of what they are currently carrying as a tax credit. Ways and Means, House Ways and Means looked at that and changed. There's an amendment that was passed in House Bill 2 that phases these tax credit carry forwards out over several years to kind of limit the impact. And so that was a hit of about 2.4 million and 6.7 in the general fund relative to that change. It would have been closer to the $100 million range if it went through based on how it was originally presented. There was a delay in the single sales factor relative to business tax in House Bill 281. General fund share was a positive. That's a pickup since it is a delay in 23 of about $16.2 million. House Bill 591 is a small change to liquor license fees relative to tobacco products and how you, the fees you charge there. That was a bill in the House Ways and Means Committee that was put into House Bill 2. That's a small $37,000 change in the license fee structure that's included here. And then I won't go through every single one, but if you look at the appropriation adjustments as it passed through the House, we do have them in division order. You will see all the various appropriations that the divisions did provide, as well as the back of the budget reductions provided in the instances of Representative Edwards had stated the HHS personnel reduction, as well as the department-wide reduction to end up with a net adjustment. And to move on to the Education Trust Fund, we can see that both in 21, the Governor and House Finance both had a positive balance in the Education Trust Fund at the end of 21, which carried forward into 22 based on the revenue estimates and the not a big change with the budget appropriations from the Education Trust Fund of $3 million here and there. Some Schedule 4 adjustments to appropriations, which we'll get to in a moment, but a positive balance in both the Governor and House Finance proposal of about 4.7 in 22 and about 7.1 under the House Finance proposal. The positive balance is carried forward into 23. And then you have the revenue. You have your assumed revenue. The splits were a little different, even though the revenue from the House Ways and Means Committee is a little higher than the Governor. It was the splits in those revenue sources between the General and Education Trust Fund. So even with those higher revenue estimates, the House Finance revenue estimates they used were about 1.08 or almost 1.09 compared to the 1.11 in the Governor. Largest change being the 101,920 reduction, because that's a statewide education property tax reduction in 23. If that were to occur without any corresponding backfill, it would, from the general fund, there would have been a necessary decrease in adequacy amounts. But what the House Finance Committee passed was not only the reduction to the statewide education property tax, but then to also backfill that with general funds to ensure that the adequacy payments, there were no changes made to those. And so they do have a current year balance of a negative 92.3 million. That is due to that reduction, the one-time reduction of the statewide education property tax, which leaves a cumulative ending balance of about 65.4, which was transferred from the general fund and accounted for in the combined statement on page 19. And just the following schedules are your revenue estimates as compared to the Governor and the House, as well as any other adjustments. You can see the large adjustments here. You have some small positive DRA position revenue, a small portion. Meals and rooms tax rate, this is very small. It's just the rentals on rental cars that goes to the Education Trust Fund, but you can see the BET figures are larger than what they were before. Threshold increase is about $2.8 million in the second year based on that timing. And then the BET rate changed to 0.55 and to, you can see in 22 and 23, about 3.9 and 12.1, loss of about $2 million in pickup because they did reduce the BPT tax, but so you did lose about $2 million as a result of the BPT tax decrease as far as a pickup from the changes in the credits. And credit tax carry forward, a small amount, close to $6 million. Also, in addition to what was shown on the general fund, single sales factor about 3.8. And then historic horse racing, $6 million and $12 million. And as Senator Hennessy had pointed out, the fiscal note initially had it closer to the 12.9 figure in both years, but as Representative Overhead stated, based on their discussions with Ways and Means and the Lottery Commission, it does take about 6 months to get everything up and going before the revenue starts coming in, as well as costs. So the 6 and the 12 are net of any potential additional costs the lottery may have to get that up and running, no pun intended. And then the SWIFT reduction of $100 million, you can see in row 11 of $100 million reduction education trust fund revenue. Public school infrastructure fund on row 16, that was the governor proposed $15 million in 22 and 23. The House Finance Committee reduced that and the House passed to $1 million a year. And then instead appropriated $17.2 million for building aid in 22 and another 10.5 in 23 for building aid. So with all those changes, there's several changes from the, obviously from the governor's introduced budget or proposed budget and House Finance. But if you look at these final two columns, you can see not much of a, a couple $1 million difference when you look on from a combined. So there are a lot of moving parts, but from a combined basis, the governor had a surplus of almost $32 million. House has about 35. So it's only a $3 million swing, even though there were a lot of moving parts. So that will be, I'll wrap up my presentation and then I can answer any questions now, or if you feel behind, I can also reach out to you afterwards. So.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Are there any immediate questions for Mr. Kane? I think over the course of the next few weeks, we'll have a chance to meet with you and get any other questions answered, which I'm sure we will come across as we go on.
Okay.
So thank you very much. At this point in time, I'd like to take a 5-minute recess.
Just make sure your microphones are off, so still be broadcasting.
Director Marconi? Can you hear me?
Yes, good afternoon.
Wait, hold on. I'm just checking. We'll be with you in a minute.
Background, it's the same background in the picture.
Oh, no kidding.
Well, yeah, the celebration in the State House, they held arguments over there one day in the Senate chambers.
Good afternoon, Director Marconi.
Good afternoon, Senator.
And we thank you for putting up with us. A few minutes behind, but we welcome you today, and you're recognized for a presentation on the Pease Development Authority.
Yes, sir. Sitting here with me today is Paul Breen. He is the Executive Director of the Pease Development Authority. And for the record, I'm Gino Marconi, the Division Director of the Division of Ports and Harbors. So I'm going to let Mr. Breen say a couple of remarks, if you don't mind.
Mr. Chairman, question? Is there a document that
No,
we should
no,
have?
on page 981
Okay.
of your compare document. Mr. Breen, you recognized?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick reminder that in 2001, Peace Development Authority and the Division of Ports and Harbors administratively merged, and we have no financial contribution to the Division of Ports and Harbors. They're independent, and Mr. Director Marconi will run through his presentation for the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Marconi.
Yes, sir, Senators. As Executive Director Breen pointed out, financially, we're separated from the Pease Development Authority, but we are self-funding through revenues that we generate from the business activities at the port and our other commercial facilities on the waterfront. As far as the operating budget goes, we only have on the books 6 full-time positions within the agency, full-time classified positions. The other positions that we have working here are hired through Pease, and we reimburse Pease for their salaries and their payroll. And the same thing with our classified employees. We reimburse the state of New Hampshire for those labor hours for the employees that we have. Of the 6 positions, about 3 years ago, the operations manager retired, and we hired that position as a Pease employee. So that one hasn't been filled for about 3 years. And most recently, our Deputy Chief Harbor Master was appointed as the Deputy Director of Emergency Management and Homeland Security, so that we have that empty position at this current time. Our thought going on over the years was, as the classified employees left the position through attrition, we would fill that position through the Pease Development Authority's hiring procedures. Again, we would reimburse them for the funds. we haven't quite decided how we're going to handle the deputy chief harbor master, because the chief and the deputy chief by statute are required to be law enforcement and certified by the Police Standards and Training Council. So we're looking into that. But the bottom line is that our budget that you have before you has no effect on general fund revenues, because we do reimburse the state for the payroll and the benefits that go along with that.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none? Nice and simple.
I'm a simple man, Senator.
We should probably let you go before Senator D'Alessandro disagrees.
I could never disagree with Senator D'Alessandro. He's at a level way beyond my elevator goes.
You're being kind.
Okay,
Thank you.
not seeing any questions. Well, actually, we have Senator Gaida who has a
Thank you,
question.
Mr. Chairman. Did COVID-19 hit your operations hard or at all, and is there a recovery period that you're looking forward to, or just trying to give a general sense of where you are?
The short answer to that, Senator, is we made some adjustments in scheduling in here because of COVID and trying to keep people separated. But believe me when I tell you, the waterfront kept working probably harder than it had pre-COVID. So we really don't have any financial issues that we have to deal with here. Ships come and go, and cargo needs to be moved, and we need to provide the services to the maritime fleet that we've been providing.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Marconi.
Thank you, Senator. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Have a great day. Chair will recognize who's speaking on the Community Development
Katie.
Finance Authority.
Katie. Yes, 177. 77.
This will be on page 177.
Mr. Chairman, I think we received a letter too.
Yeah, there. There is a presentation document that has been handed out. CDFA at the top. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairman. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Good. Nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
And you are recognized.
Thank you very much. I'm Katie Easterly Marte, the Executive Director of the Community Development Finance Authority. And if it's okay with you, I'll just provide a few remarks about our request. I thank you for this opportunity to address you regarding our line item, which is in the State Treasury Department's budget for fiscal years 22 and 23, which is New Hampshire's required match for administrating the Federal Community Development Block Grant Program. We're a state chartered independent nonprofit organization, and as such, our board is appointed by the Governor and Council. As a state authority, we are among a handful of unique entities that work in partnership with the state and federal initiatives to strengthen New Hampshire's community through the distribution of resources to municipalities, nonprofits, and businesses. I am here to request the continued match funding from the state of New Hampshire in the amount of $400,000 over the next biennium. The request of $200,000 per year represents the federally required match of state funds towards program administration for New Hampshire's annual allocation of federal block grant resources under the CDBG program. Under the state CDBG program, states award grants to smaller units of general local government that develop and preserve decent, affordable housing, provide services to the most vulnerable in our communities, and create and retain jobs. Annually, each state develops funding priorities and criteria for selecting projects. The Department of Housing and Urban Development uses a formula to allocate these resources, and funds remain similar year over year. In the next biennium, New Hampshire will receive approximately $18.66 million. CDFA provides the state with an exceptionally cost-efficient system for providing these resources to our communities. CDFA is financially self-sufficient and relies on fees from the program it administers, plus this match to administer the programs. The CDFA program, the CDBG program is focused on the development of viable, sustainable communities by providing decent housing, suitable living environments, and expanding economic opportunities. CDBG projects in New Hampshire have leveraged tens of millions of dollars in matching capital. All eligible New Hampshire municipalities and counties have the opportunity to access up to $1.5 million in resources each year. In addition, they can request funds for emergency and planning for projects. Projects are awarded are community-driven efforts that local leaders and community members say are necessary within their municipality or region. CDFA staff administer competitive grant rounds throughout the year. All applications undergo an extensive programmatic and financial review by CDFA. In addition, projects that meet all necessary criteria are voted on by the independent 11-member Community Development Advisory Committee and confirmed by CDFA's 11-member Board of Directors. All 22 of these New Hampshire citizens who review and approve these projects are appointed by the Governing Council and represent a number of different sectors. Once the boards recommends funding, the proposals are sent to the Executive Committee for final approval. Federal funds come with significant requirements, as I'm sure you know, and CDFA's professional staff train and provide technical assistance to our grantees throughout the pre-application, application, and implementation phases of their project. We work closely with partners to find creative solutions and offer guidance on project development, and as well as ease the burden of compliance and protect the investments of the taxpayers' dollars. In calendar years 2018 and 2019, funds from the state CDBG program have improved the lives of 2,455 people through public facility improvements and 613 people through emergency grants. And we've also created and retained hundreds of jobs, 260 workforce housing units, and provide technical assistance to 602 micro businesses. CDFA respectfully requests that the state of New Hampshire continue to provide the federally required match funds, a total of $400,000 for the 2022-2023 state fiscal years. And by doing so, we can deploy approximately $18.66 million of resources into New Hampshire's communities for economic development projects that are critical to our communities. I very much appreciate you having me here today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Katie, nice to see you again. You're anticipating any disruption or any irregularity in terms of federal funding availability?
We don't expect so. We've been able to advance about the same number of projects as we typically do this year. This past year, due to COVID, we've had 3 projects that have needed slightly more time, but they've still been ultimately successful at carrying out their projects. And the funds continue to flow from the federal government with about the regularity that they typically do. So I think we're lucky that many of our project sponsors have put together significant plans for the projects that are necessary in their communities. And we really are enforcing with additional funds for those planning grants that idea, because we know there could be additional resources in the next number of years. And we want to be sure that the projects that are implemented are ones that have those same impacts that our CDBG investments have had over the years. So we hope that our process can only aid in if there's additional resources. in really identifying those critical projects, but we don't see any disruptions that are anticipated.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Further questions, Senator Morse?
Mr. Chair, I see you have your budget book open. And did the House appropriate this? Yeah,
Yes. Look, it looks like they've got the same amount as the governor.
okay.
Further questions? Just for clarification, Katie, CDFA and CDBG work with grants, not loans. Is that correct?
Yes, we sometimes do provide other loan resources if they're necessary to get the project to happen, but typically that's done with financial institutions throughout the state, and these are grant funds.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, okay. Yeah, Department of Environmental Services. And with a presentation. And you do have a handout for that as well. Do we have a page number? 821. Okay. Yeah. Is everyone available in DES, or do we need to wait for somebody?
I think we're all set, Senator.
Oh, that'd be great. Is that 821?
Yes.
Okay.
So Senator, I don't know if Mike can put our presentation up, or I can have Susan Carlson try that.
Go ahead and try if you'd like.
You got that, Susan?
There we go.
We're still working on it. While Susan Carlson, our Chief Operating Officer, is trying to get that on the screen. Again, my name is Bob Scott. I'm Commissioner with the Department of Environmental Services. We're trying one more time here.
My problem is I'm not elevated enough to share. Mike would have to do it.
Mike, is that something you're able to help us out with? I'm assuming Mike Hoffman's there.
Just saw him.
Good God.
There you go.
There we go.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So again, Bob Scott with the Department of Environmental Services. I'm just going to run through quickly through a few slides for you all. If you go to the next slide, please. So again, you're all probably very familiar with our mission with protecting public health and the environment. Next slide, please. And again, with our core functions, we do spend a lot of time on water quality issues and water related issues, but we also obviously do air pollution, waste management, emergency response, and site remediation, or just to name a few. Next slide, please, Mike. So again, we're to give you an idea of the slides, what we do by division. Our biggest division by far is our water division, and we'll talk about that in the budget also. But as you see here, we're divided with 3 divisions, and the commissioner's office is also kind of effectively a division also. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, significant statewide, department-wide activities, water, air, and soil contamination, particularly PFAS, arsenic, as 2 examples, are something that take a lot of our staff time. Infrastructure related to water is an increasingly large component, and I think a successful component for the state. We're lucky to have the Drinking Water Groundwater Trust Fund. We'll talk a little bit more in the budget slides coming up on the state revolving loan funds for drinking water and clean water. And not listed also is our PFAS loan fund, which is relatively new. And that was established last biennium with the bonding authority for up to $50 million. Next slide, please. So some of our budget highlights, our operating budget is roughly $247 million for 22 and a little over 250 for 23. That's reflecting what came over from the House with 489 authorized full-time positions. And we manage over 40 dedicated fund programs. Next slide, Mike. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. So this pie chart shows how we use our funds. You'll note that over 65% of our budget goes right out the door in the form of grants, loans, reimbursements, and contracts. We've shown here our 22 adjusted budget. The 23 budget is very similar. Next slide. Here, we're focusing primarily on the 22 budget, but to give you an idea, 7% is general funds. 24% is federal funds, and 69 is other funds, 69%. So of that 69% or 172 million, 46 million or 29% is the state revolving loan funds. Another 15% is the Drinking Water Groundwater Trust Fund. 6% is the PFAS funds. And then we have our waste fee programs, our air programs, and our commissioner's office programs. Overall, our state revolving loan fund programs, both the federal and the reimbursement funds that are reused, that accounts for about 35% of our total budget. Next slide. This chart shows the allocation by division, with again water being the largest with 51% of the total funds, waste being another 41%, air is third at 5%, and the commissioner's office at 3%. Next slide. So I think your request to us was to show comparisons by biennium. So this is the use of funds. Here you'll see for salary and benefits, there's an increase for 23 compared to actual expenses. For 20, we're down as a result of about an 18% vacancy rate we had. And increases of benefits for 23, 22, 23. So retirement costs went up 19%. And of course, we had to add the 27th pay period. For grants, the state aid grant, which we'll talk about in future slides, shows a decrease reflective. The House eliminated roughly 15.5 million in mostly wastewater state aid grants. Again, I'll talk about that in a moment. And plus we had a small decrease in the other state aid grant schedules. Loans, what's come across to you is shows an increase reflective of the addition of PFAS loans for on the order of 15 million per year. And again, this is part of a $50 million bonding that was passed by the legislature last biennium. On the grant side, on the grant other, we're showing an increase, which is shown on page 459 for the trust fund grant, the Drinking Water Groundwater Trust Fund, which increased on the order of 4.5 million from 10.5 to 15 million. And we offset that by some other smaller reductions in other grant programs. And finally, on this slide, contracts did increase by 4.8 million. That's primarily a result of our dam assessments grant program. So that's on page 432. So that shows 1 million per year for consultants. And this is federal funds that were to be used for detailed engineering assessments and design work on state-owned flood control dams that were constructed under the National Resource Conservation Service, particularly 3 dams in the Sauhegan River watershed. So that one account represents 50% of the total increase in that cost category. Next slide. So again, trying to show a comparison by source of funds. The general funds decrease is again shown as a reflection of the elimination of the state aid grant program for the wastewater state aid grant program. The other under SRF shows a decrease in 14 million. Really, because the FY20 actual revenue was significantly higher than the budgeted amounts. So this is the revolving loan fund. We had $44 million in payments in income, while we had a $20 million dollars in our budget. Under federal funds, we're showing a 21% increase in SRF, state revolving loan funds. And so I'll go on to the next slide, I guess.
Commissioner, before you go on, can you
going too fast for go ahead.
Can you clarify in the last 2 slides what those numbers are? Are they House numbers, governor's numbers, your numbers?
They are House numbers.
Yeah, so those reflect what came across from the House.
It does reflect? I'm sorry, I didn't hear your last statement.
Yes, they do reflect the House numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
And Senator Gaida has a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bob, good to see you again.
Senator.
The state aid grants going down 90%. Was there some impetus for causing that?
Yeah, actually, if you could, I have a slide coming right up to discuss that, and that may help crystallize what happened in the House.
Okay.
Okay, please continue.
Okay. And let's see, where are we? So if you go to the next slide, please.
No, he's on it.
Oh, I'm on the right slide. Okay, thank you, Sue. Okay, so this table shows the changes in the operating budget between the agency, the governor, and the House phases. So as kind of a time change as things happen. The increase in the governor's phase represents his approval to fund positions that were unfunded in the agency phase. Obviously, we followed the guidance given at the time with what we gave the governor's office, as well as his approval of prioritized needs for admin services. And again, this shows, which we'll discuss more in the slides coming up, the decrease that we were just discussing for the wastewater treatment state aid grants. Next slide.
Commissioner, before you go forward on that, can you express what the guidance was on the last slide from the governor's office?
Sure. Sue, why don't you help me out with that, if you don't mind, Sue Carlson?
Senator Morse, can you ask the question again?
Hi, Sue.
Hi.
In the agency phase, what was the guidance given from the governor's office?
We were told to limit our general funds to a small a set number. And what we did in order to meet that number, we had to reduce our general funds, which included us unfunding 4 general fund positions, as well as cutting other expenses. We achieved approximately a $3 million reduction from our FY21 general fund budget to FY22. When discussing with the governor during the governor's phase, he looked at the number of positions that we vacated and added funding back in for 4 positions that we had unfunded in order to meet his goal, which included 1 position for the Dam Bureau and 3 positions for the Solid Waste Bureau. And then in addition, he also funded the prioritized needs for Department of Administrative Services, primarily in the area of building maintenance for 29 Hazen Drive, and the Department of Information Technology key prioritized needs, which were primarily related to software, included Office 365. We also had a few minor adjustments to the operating expenses, as you can see, and that's what ended up being the difference between our original request and the governor's approved request that was delivered to the House.
Thank you.
Senator Hennessy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question on your number of positions. I see 489 between the governor.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I have a question on your positions.
Yes, that's better.
Your salaries and benefits went up by 21% from 2021 to 22-23.
Right.
What is your current positions that you have? What was the increase?
Authorized or filled?
Authorized?
Authorized, we have 484 positions authorized. The governor gave us 5 new positions in the budget. What is actually reflected here is we've been running an 18% vacancy rate for a good part of FY20 and FY21 because of COVID. So the expenses for FY20 are down, and so that drives our FY20-21 budget comparison to 22-23 down. Also in FY22-23, obviously we have the 27th pay period in 23. We're also looking at increases in health insurance, and we saw a 19% increase in the employer's share of the retirement system.
Follow up.
Follow up.
So the number of 107,685, is that your actual or is that your budget for 20?
That's a combination of actual for 20 and budget for 21. When we were asked, we were showing the totals for the biennium, not by fiscal year. So the issue when you're showing 2021 combined is you have 1 year of actual expenses and 1 year of budgeted expenses. So it's a bit of a hybrid versus 2 years of budgeted.
Senator Gaida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm again focusing on the grants to the SAG category, a reduction of 89.3% that produced a 3% reduction apparently that the governor was asking for. The question is, how many communities is that going to affect? And why was 100% of that cut asked by the governor taken out of that particular category?
So Mike, maybe you could advance 2 slides. We'll just go to that slide for the senator. Or 3 slides, sorry. So there you go. So Senator, this was done in the House Finance Committee. So, and again, I'll for the rest of maybe everybody understands, but for state aid grants, these are after the fact grants. Once the community has done the project, assuming it's authorized by the legislature, and then we reimburse a certain percent on the order of 20% for the work that has been done. So one concern we have is there's the governor's budget coming across had a moratorium on new projects to be funded. We had projects that we have been paying towards, and projects that had gone through the government council. In our discussions early on with the governor's office, we felt obligated to fund those. So that's what the ask was out of the governor's budget. My understanding from House Finance is that they were looking at reduced revenue projections, and they were looking at so that's where they decided to make the cut. There was a footnote that was put in to allow me to ask, I think it's December 31st next year, assuming funds are available, to ask for those monies to be put back. It's problematic in some respects, again, with monies that have been being paid on a schedule by the state. That footnote would effectively require a 6 months hiatus, and then we'd be looking at back payments. So that effectively is what came out of the House Finance Committee. So can you elaborate any more? Have I missed anything?
Yeah, Senator Gotti, your first question was how many communities are affected by this? It's 125 projects across 41 communities.
Thank you.
And these, for the community's education, state aid grants, we pay essentially a 20% grant based on the community's debt service payments. So if a community has a 20-year loan, we'll be paying over 20 years. And a lot of these commitments are commitments that we made, 5, 10, 15 years ago that we're continuing to pay on, plus any new commitments we made over in fiscal year 20.
So, follow up?
Follow up?
Thank you. So in your estimation, would it be sensible to try to restore these funds?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Again, Senator, if I could differentiate, there's a difference between meeting our existing obligations, which is what we're talking about, and then the concept of a moratorium for taking on new obligations. So that's where I draw the line between, but I absolutely agree, assuming money's available, we would like to meet our existing obligations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My memory of the state aid grants is that many of them, or at least some of them, were work that was required by federal regulation in order to bring some systems up to compliance. Is that correct?
In many cases, yes.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, please continue.
All right, so if we could go back 2 slides, I think, Mike. Thank you. Real quickly, this is just, again, we're trying to answer the questions that we were given. This is another comparison of the budget by the sources of funds. So we'll go to the next slide in the interest of time. So again, so some of the House Bill 2 sections, we were given last biennium, we were given $6 million in drinking water, groundwater trust fund funds to investigate and research PFAS contamination over the last biennium. Between the pandemic and the continuing resolution and actually receiving the funds, between those 2 things, we are admittedly we're at a slow start on spending those funds. We spent $1 million of it so far and have another $500,000 under contract, pending contracts. So here we're asking for a lapse extension to be able to use those funds. Again, at state aid grants, we just mentioned that already, so I won't elaborate on that. And next, go 2 slides forward if you could, Mike. So if I could, so again, the state aid grants we talked about for our request or what we're asking for. So to answer the Senator's Guider's question, we are asking for that. It's on the slide. Some other issues, items we're asking for is a mercury analyzer. We'd like to have funds added to replace an an aging mercury analyzer we have in the lab for water sample testing. Many of you are probably aware many of the water bodies in the state are impaired for mercury. We would like to continue to be able to monitor that issue. We can't get parts for the existing monitor, it's so old. The next two issues have to do with CERCLA, which is Superfund, if you will, maintenance. One is we're asking to be added in additional contract funds for additional work at these Superfund sites. And we're also asking for funds for an aging vehicle that's over 12 years old to get people back and forth and do some of the work there. And then finally, we're also asking for some IT consultant or information technology consultant work on our wetlands databases and conversion to web-based applications from there to help us get a little bit more efficient. Next slide, please. Continuing on for our requests, this is probably the easiest one here. Our environmental health program, we get some federal funds from CDC, ATSDR. They've informed us that we're receiving additional money more than we had expected. So we're asking for that to be added into the budget. So that was very timely. So we're able to, we knew that in time to get that for the Senate. We're also asking for we had zeroed out based on last biennium, we had $200,000 for general funds that went into our invasive aquatic weed eradication program or mitigation program. We're asking for that to be restored. For our air permit program, our fees are based on emissions, and we have a formula set by rule. And in the past, in order to reduce the amount of increase for those emission-based fees, we had an influx of general fund money on the order of $500,000 per year to offset, to help keep that from happening. We're requesting that general fund influx be restored also. And then finally, we're asking for funds for a part-time position to assist us in deploying our computers, monitors, and other IT equipment. Given the great, huge workload put on DOIT from COVID, which I will praise them. They've done a great job in allowing us to be very efficient, even while we address the COVID issue with many people working remotely. We have a huge backlog on the computers that we have ordered to be replaced, and we're looking for a part-time support position to help us deploy those to the individuals and do all the updates and all the back and forth required for that. And then that's it for our presentation. Again, I have a brand new assistant commissioner, Dennis Diesel, who's on the line. Sue Carlson is our chief operating officer, and you've already heard from her. So happy to answer any questions, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any questions from the committee?
I have a question.
Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, the Lakes Restoration Fund, how progress report on how we're doing with the aquatic vascular plants?
I won't say we've licked the problem. It's an ongoing problem that unfortunately we still need to continue to address. I think in the last biennium we added one water body, if I remember correctly, on top of the list. So if you look at the curve over time, it's still increasing, but at least it's a crest maybe in sight if we're lucky. But obviously, I'll put in a shameless plug for those funds. You know, it needs attention to keep that from growing, and it's definitely a significant issue for all our water bodies in the state.
Further
Follow up?
Just a further question about the St. Germain situation in Merrimack. What's the story with the settlement that you've made with them? Or the arrangement that you've made with them?
So a lot of tendrils to that. So I'll try to make sure I understand the question. We did a consent decree with St. Gobain. This is, I'm going to have my time frame incorrect. I think it was 2018, maybe 2017, whereby within a certain area, basically it's of a 64 square mile area. They've agreed to take some responsibilities for the groundwater contamination. This is really, we're talking about people's private wells. So they've, and I will say that, you know, this is kind of old now, but even before we put pen to ink for that agreement, I think they had already connected to the local public water systems over 420 or so properties. So that work has continued as we press forward. So St. Cobain has funded, in some extent, Pennachuck Water Company is the one of the recipients, if you will, of because much of this is in their franchise area. So they've paid for the water connections, which still leave, you know, some of the concerns for the residents within those areas is they had a well beforehand, and in their eyes, they certainly weren't paying a monthly water bill. So that's still a concern with many, but the success of that is we have many people who were connected to public water. Beyond that area, we are seeing with our new standards, which were promulgated last year through the legislature, we are seeing a fair number of properties in Londonderry that are outside of that agreed upon area, that consent decree, with impacts to PFAS, and we are working very closely with the town on that issue as we speak.
Just to follow up on that, was there not a court decision within the last month with Merrimack?
There was some legal activity regarding, again, based on the legislative activity, the legislature, I think Biden before last, passed a bill to require air controls to be put on stacks like St. Gobain's. We issued them a permit based on that. And as of February, the permit gave the facility till February to put a thermal oxidizer on, basically a stack control that would burn off emissions. The facility wasn't able to do that in time for February. We took them to court as a state and basically had a settlement agreement. They agreed to do certain things, including a time frame to put the controls on, as well as do some monitoring for potential to put a scrubber on for some potential side pollutants that could be caused by that activity. As well as some penalties also. So that's the activity the state's taken. The city the municipality has done some activities too and withdrawn some activities. So I think there's still an outstanding court date coming up between the town and the facility.
Thank you. Any further questions? I guess I would just have to, one request. The information you gave us in the presentation was good. But I wondered if you could update the page numbers, especially on the budget adjustment request. The page numbers don't match the compare budget.
Okay. Yeah, I used the House budget that was version out there, not the compare report, so I could certainly change it to the compare report.
Yeah, because it looks like we'll be working off the compare report. So it'd be much more helpful in just finding those areas with correct page numbers. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you, folks, for your presentation.
Thank you.
That concludes the presentations for today. We will be meeting tomorrow at 1 o'clock in here. And with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Moved by Senator D'Alessandro, seconded by Senator Morse. Call roll, Senator Morse.
Yes.
Senator Reagan. Senator Gaida.
Yes.
Senator Rosenwald. Senator Hennessy. Did I call you yet? Senator D'Alessandro? And the chair votes yes, we are adjourned. Thank you, folks.